Hi, my name is Tom Ollerton, and this is the Shiny New Object podcast. This is a podcast about new marketing technology, and every week I have the pleasure, the privilege, the excitement of interviewing someone who's influential, interesting, etc. in the industry, and this week it's no different. I have Marc Lewis, the Dean at the School of Communication Arts. But in an interesting twist of fate, I met Marc downstairs for a drink, and we got chatting to his friend who was introduced as Ben the Buddhist, and I pushed Ben on his actual name. It's Ben Andrew. And I said, Ben, what do you do? You're an interesting lad. He said, I've retired. So I've taken the interesting decision of improvising the guests on this week's podcast, but Ben comes across as a very interesting and lovely chap. So I'm really interested to see where this conversation is going to go between Marc and Ben. It might go terribly wrong, but that's on me. Before we get into that conversation, I'm speaking at the Data Driven Creative Conference in New York on the 7th of December. Regular listeners to the podcast will be very bored of that fact. I apologise, but contracts and all that. Right, so Marc, Ben.
Hi.
So for people who don't know who you are, can you just give us a little background about who you are and what you do?
All right, so there are two of us behind the mic talking to you, Tom. The Londoner, me, and a Bristolian, so you'll be able to spot the difference between us.
A.K.A. Pirate.
Here you go. So my name is Marc, and I am the Dean at School of Communication Arts. We're a social enterprise. We are, at the moment, the world's most awarded creative school. We're a bit of an unusual school, and we're based in Brixton, in Mass Nightclub. Come and see us soon.
Do you know the Mass Nightclub? Is that the one in the church?
Yeah.
Well, what's the name of the venue across the road? The Fridge?
The Electric is right across the road, and
it used to be the Fridge.
It used to be the Fridge.
I did a gig there once in my early 20s, and it was the only gig I ever did that had a rider, which was like 3 slabs of Stella and some weed.
Okay.
And I went through as much of it as possible, and I fell asleep on stage. So there you go. Anyway, slightly unprofessional, but anyway.
So my name's Ben, and prior to my early retirement, I had lots of different businesses. I've always gone and talked for Marc on the second day of his school, and my role with Marc is to try and open the minds of the fresh students. I also do lots of corporate talks for the PR firms, and the same role applies. I.e., let's destroy what they thought they know and try and rebuild something that they thought they didn't know, but they actually probably do know.
Right, well, you can instantly see why I wanted... I got Ben in a headlock and forced him to be on this podcast straight away, despite having a meeting him about 25 minutes ago. Right, so given that there's a couple of you, we've got to get through some of these getting to know you questions. So, first question is... in the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to?
Wow. What have you become better at, Ben?
Everything. So I went through a stage where I said no to not a lot. I said yes to everything. And I realised that actually my goal was to achieve financial freedom, and in achieving financial freedom I also realised that I got very good at saying no to everything, and through saying no to everything, new opportunities arose that were never there in the first place.
Give me an example of that.
I found that as soon as I started saying no to things, people would offer me opportunities that they would never have offered if I'd said yes to their initial request. For me, desperation doesn't sell. Saying yes is often a sign of desperation because you're saying yes to so many things, you put yourself under pressure, and that desperation will tell. People can see that. So for me, when I started saying no, it was the opposite. There was no desperation.
Can you give me a story or a specific example of that?
I remember once I said no to a very large bank to do a talk because I was very... I wasn't into the way they were perceived as doing business. I said no to doing the talk. Through saying no, they wanted me more. In the end, I said yes based on certain conditions, and those conditions were I wanted the whole of the board present at the talk. They told me it was impossible, so I said no. They then told me it was possible. And through that, I was able to demand a price that I would never have dreamt of demanding from anyone else. And it was all from saying no.
Mark, it's not your experience.
I definitely relate to what Ben is saying there. There's no doubt about it. The playing hard to get is a great way to put it, isn't it? But I would say that my answer to your question is one. I've heard people answer this in a similar way on your previous episodes. Saying no to meetings, but not saying no to meeting in total, but saying no to meeting outside of school would be one. Is during, and particularly during term time, I will not leave the school building unless I'm about to meet, somebody stunning or stunningly bright. And even then, I much prefer they came to the school because I want them to be inspired. Because your office is an absolute. We're in a really expensive part of London, and I'm sure somebody's paying a fortune for this. But with all the best will in the world, I've never seen anything that looks so boring in all my life. This place is. There's nothing on the walls. It's miserable. There's not even a roof. The ceiling, I can see like copper pipes and metal pipes, and it's like, this place is dull, and the people outside are dull, and that's generally what London is, or life is. It's full of dull people and dull places. And when people walk into my building, it's a Grade 2 listed church, so you can smell the character of the building. And it used to be mass nightclubs, so people get flashbacks to when they perhaps were on drugs in a building, and there are stories to be told there. And then they kind of meet my kids, my 36 rough and ready students, who are all phenomenal, and they get inspired by them. So whether you're coming to meet because you want some of my consultancy time, or maybe you're becoming a sponsor of the school, or whatever it is, it's much smarter for me to say, no, I'm not coming to you, you come to me. And save myself the journey time, but also I'm much more likely to have you as a longer term relationship if you come to me.
So at this point, just for people who don't know about the school, can you just give us a top line on that?
Yeah, top line is we're a portfolio school. So what that means is we prepare people to become creatives in the comms industry, mainly, I guess, agencies, although increasingly media owners and brands. And so traditionally we have kind of copy and art, although that's fragmenting itself. I take 36 students, about a third get a full scholarship, some also get a living bursary, and that allows me to bring really interesting kids from interesting backgrounds. I use the word kids quite wrongly. This year I've got a 45-year-old student who's just started, maybe slightly older, and so quite a lot of people in their 30s, but also in their 20s. I try not to have teenagers, don't like them very much.
Why don't you like teenagers?
I just don't think they're necessarily right for this job right then and there. I feel our job requires energy and empathy and synergy. And so if I'm asking you to sell mortgage or pension or car or holiday, you're that much more likely to understand it if you can relate to it. And I just feel at 18, 19, 20, you're much better off going and seeing a bit of the world and doing other things. Yeah. There are exceptions to that. So I've had some phenomenal 18, 19-year-olds, no doubt about it. So every year I will have one or two prodigies, total phenomenon. They are there. But my mood at the school is 25, 26 years old. So I have 36 students, a third on scholarship. I have about 900 teachers. About 890 of them are volunteers who come maybe once a term, maybe once a year. You've had a number of them on your podcast, Dave Burse, Patrick Collister. They might come in maybe once a year, twice a year. And then I have a faculty of 13 who give me a day or 2 days or 3 days a week. Alexandra Taylor, for example, Steve Harrison, for example. The good and the great of the industry who have a lot to give in wisdom and want to stay young. And they know that a great way to stay young is to share oxygen with young people.
And of course, Ben fits into that 900 teacher. So can you tell the audience what you told me when we met earlier, that you'd had a very special day in the year? Yeah,
all right. I'll kick off and Ben, you chip in however you want to chip in. Every year I write a story for the school, so every year is a slightly different experience, but there's a rule to the story. and always on day 2 we do a particular thing. So I'm a big believer. I mean, the school's often described as a bit of a cult. The way that we behave and the way that we try and change mindset to some extent. And I have a lot of British kids. I mean, we're not a British school. We're a global school, but we have a lot of British, and the British are really reserved. You know, we're bad in bed. It's said.
Hey, come on.
We fill up auditoriums from the back to the front. We need to get pissed before we open up and share our feelings. You know, we're a very reserved bunch, you know, and that's no good for creativity. Creativity demands that we are open and honest, and we're able to hold eye contact and tell people the craziest, shittiest, weirdest things that are going on in our heads, and build something fun with those. So on day 1 is just me preaching. I'm just talking for a whole day, non-stop. Day 2, I bring in...
What do you talk about for a whole day?
I know, right? It's crazy.
So it's like Castaway, right?
Tony Robbins.
Yeah, it's like Castaway.
I'm like Fidel Castro doing it. It's like that. But poor kids. But day 2, I always bring in Ben the Buddhist.
No, but what do you talk about for a day? I'm serious.
On day 1.
Yeah, how do you do 7 hours of talking?
I know, and usually on no sleep either. I was really scared I was going to lose my voice for today because I did 8 hours yesterday. Well, I introduce them to the school. I talk a little bit about the history of the school, my expectations of them, introduce them to what my philosophy is on creativity, get them to understand a bit about that, start to talk about my process. There's a whole bunch of stuff, very basic, introducing them to some of the topics that we're going to cover. But yeah, I don't stop talking for 8 hours.
And then
so that's day
Ben
1.
comes in.
Day 2, Ben the Buddhist, Deanna, who's my resident poet, and an improv troupe. And we break the room up into 3 groups, and each group will do each of those 3 activities in a circuit. So they'll take it in turns, but so everyone's doing something. So they might be doing learning how to do performance poetry with Deanna Roger, phenomenal poet, or they'll be learning to do improv. And we've had amazing improv teachers over the 10 years, from Neil Malarkey, upways, downways, and sideways.
So just on the poetry bit, that's interesting. Ben is still an enigma to me. We're going to get to the bottom of that shortly. But what is it about poetry that's important on day 2?
On day 2, it's not just the poetry. The poetry is important. It's performance poetry. I'm getting you to stand up on stage in front of people that you don't know, sharing something personal that you've written, and nobody, not nobody, people like me enjoy being on stage, but I'm weird. A great fear, one of the biggest fears that people have as a species is public speaking, is to have a whole bunch of eyeballs staring at you. And I force you to do that every day at the school, starting on day 2. We want to smash that dis-ease on day 2, and have you feeling comfortable writing something very personal and then sharing it and having 20 pairs of eyeballs watching, smiling, nodding, frowning.
And what does that do for your students?
It releases them from fear. It goes, well, I thought that was the worst thing that's ever going to happen to me, and I survived it. What worse could happen? So the day is about destroying walls and creating freedom. So whether it's getting on stage for performance poetry or making an absolute wally of yourself doing improv, improv is about listening and offering and being generous, but it's also about saying the first thing it comes into your head often, which is really important, and not having that filter that can stop potentially a really silly wise sort of spit that you might be able to turn into gold. So poetry, improv, and then Ben will introduce himself and what he does in mindfulness in just a moment, just releases the students. You can see by day 2 they're touching each other and hugging each other and falling over each other, and properly you see them becoming a cloud, a unit, a one, and once we become that cloud, that unit, a one, we can I'd have to do that. We can take on anything, any school. We will beat anybody up because we are together. We're a unit, and we're prepared to tell each other anything for the good of the unit.
Yeah.
So how do you fit into that?
Okay, so we kind of call it apologies.
That's his ringtone.
It's actually not. It's my smartwatch reminding me where my phone is, even though it was right next to it.
Wow.
Anyway.
Stoned, have you got a bean? I don't know where you're watching.
So day 2, I come in and initially we we talked about the session being mindfulness. Mindfulness is a very small part of what we talk about. So actually, what I tend to do with the students is introduce theory, some of which is Buddhist, into their everyday action and break down their truths. So a large part of what I do is based on absolute truth and relative truth and the attachment to those truths and what those truths mean. So it's something we rarely think about. Is the truth that we base our being and our belonging on and therefore our ideas on an absolute truth or a relative truth? Is it something
Tell me
we
about
made
the
up?
difference between an absolute truth and
So an absolute truth is what goes up must come down. It's an absolute truth, right? Until it's disproven. At the moment, it's completely absolute. The sun is hot. That is absolute. A relative truth is relative to that situation and moment in time, which is absolutely fine. So I can create a relative truth. I.e., when I was 4, if you said to me, Ben, what do you want to do? I would say, I want to fly. And people would say, you want to be a pilot? No, I want to fly, like a bird. I'm not lying to you, it's a relative truth. And I can only work out that that's a relative truth when I go to my bedroom window with a carrier bag and try and jump out and realise I can't fly. And then I realise that that truth was relative. The problem stems when we turn relative truths into absolute truths. So then I say this truth is now absolute, when it's not. It's relative to the situation.
And so what kind of truths were people giving you examples of today?
Okay, so I'll get many truths around cultural belief.
Such as?
God exists. And that influences my ability to accept feedback on certain items. Many people will, not many, all of them will talk about politicians, because politicians take a relative truth and make it absolute, and then are unable to see a good idea when it's presented to them because they're protecting a truth that no longer exists, but in their mind it does. So what makes you part of a party is made up. It was relative at a certain point, and now someone's saying to you, I've got this amazing idea about how to cure the energy need of the world, but because that goes against a truth that you've held on to that no longer is relevant, I'm going to battle it, no matter if it's a good idea.
So you push people on the difference between absolute and relative truths, and how do you do that? What happens next?
We delve into attachment, which is probably the key element of all of it. So in Buddhism, attachment is hell. Attachment is like the sin, the only sin. Because attachment leads to need and desire.
What do you mean by attachment specifically?
Like being attached to an idea, being attached to a concept, being attached to a person, being attached to a thing. Those things can only lead to negativity. If I'm attached to a concept and an idea, and you challenge that, I'm not going to listen to your challenge. I'm going to protect the idea. And I have to understand that. So as a student coming into Marc's school for the next 306 days,
Yeah.
I'm going to be challenged. And if I'm too protectionist and I'm too attached to an idea that doesn't really exist, that I've made up, then I'm not going to be able to see the wood through the trees. I'm not going to be able to take your criticism because I'm too busy protecting something that doesn't really exist. That only exists because I've made it exist.
So that is fascinating, isn't it? And in my career in the marketing advertising game, and my career now as a startup entrepreneur guy, like I cling on to my attachments like crazy.
Right.
So how do you get people to become aware of their attachments and let go of them?
And that's where the session really delves into fears, desires, cultural understanding, what has been pushed on us and what we actually truly believe. And you know what? You can't do that in 2 hours, but you can certainly plant the seed. Can certainly plant the seed so that they go away and they think, shit, I had that wrong.
What I see, so we're just taking our 10th intake in now, and what I've seen with the previous 9 is they get some Ben on day 2, and they will then email Ben or phone Ben in a month's time or 6 months' time when they have this moment of crisis where they're ready to release their hold on their attachment, because without making that commitment to release, they're no longer able to continue on their journey in peace. Ben's quite right. That plants a seed or a hook, and there will be a bounce back moment where not all of them, but a number of them will WhatsApp him or call him or whatever. And if we're lucky enough, Ben will come back and visit a few times, and you see it flower over time. But
so we could do the whole podcast on that question alone, but I do promise to get to know you a little better, so I do apologise. So in the last 5 years, which new belief or behaviour has improved your work life?
Wow. I wrote some thoughts down on that.
There's two types of people on this podcast. There's people who bring sheets of A4 and there's people who wing it. I'm very surprised that Mark is a sheets of A4 guy.
What thing in the last 5 years has improved
what belief? What thing that is...
What practice?
Yeah.
I think that... this is all going to sound like a really spiritual podcast. Ben the Buddhist and the answer I'm about to give.
Go for it.
But I'm going to say meditation and yoga.
Right.
I'm going to say practicing mindful moments throughout the day.
So what is your practice?
Well, I wake up in the morning and I will do...
What time are you, like early riser?
I wake up about 5:30 because I'm getting old and I've got, I'm a boy. But I'm out of bed and I'm ready to roll by about 6:15. I'll go down and have a cup of tea or coffee and a little bit of light breakfast, and then I will do some yoga. You
meditate? Oh, you do yoga after coffee?
I do yoga. Yeah. I do yoga once I'm kind of stretched.
Sorry, being a yoga person myself, what are we talking, like an hour here? Or
no, we're talking 25 minutes or so. Right. And
self-guided or...
usually, up until fairly recently, apps that can time you, measure you, and I love things to be gamified, as you'll discover when I talk about my shiny new object. So I love the apps that give me some feedback loops.
I really struggle with meditation and yoga apps, because both of those things, yoga and meditation, are meant to take you away from...
I know.
And then you're like, well, I'm just going to unlock my phone, open my app, put my headphones in, and you're already negative like that for me.
I hear that, and I get told that a lot, particularly when you hear my shiny new objects. I think you'll struggle with that. But I don't look at the data on a day-to-day. I might look at the data on a week or a month. Anyway, I stopped using the app about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I bought a power plate.
What's a power plate? Is that
yeah.
So you went from yoga to a power plate,
right?
Really?
And I'm doing yoga on a power plate. So about 5 weeks ago, I had heart surgery, and so for about a month before surgery, I just couldn't do yoga anymore. I was just not able to do it. And about 3 weeks after surgery, I put on a lot of weight, and I just thought, I need to get back into health. I'm going to microwave my way back into health, and I'm going to turbo boost this. And I went on eBay and I bought a £4,000 power plate for 250 quid on eBay. Some idiot bought it for £4,000, used it twice, realised they didn't have any space for it in their kitchen, and stuck it on eBay, and I picked it up. And so instead of using my app and doing guided meditation, guided yoga on the app, I'm just doing 20 minutes on the power plate now. So that's one thing. And if I don't do...
How do you do downward dog on a power plate?
What you do is you put your hand on the actual vibrating thing and your feet on the floor, and you do your salutations that way.
It's like got you. We're getting mega into yoga detail. No, it's...
what I'll say is, if I don't do yoga in the morning, my students know about it all day. I'm a miserable bastard if I don't do my yoga in the morning. What I notice is I use that time to think about the day ahead. Often I'll go in with a question. I've got a mate called David Pearl who does Street Wisdom. I don't know if you come across Street Wisdom. And what was great with Street Wisdom is you ask the street a question, and the street will give you the right answers, or give you answers at the very least. What I find, for me at least, with yoga is I find silence in yoga, and inside that silence I find answers to dilemmas or concerns that I have, perhaps about a particular student or a challenge that I'm trying to face. I get that out of my yoga. So it makes me a happier person during the day, and it often points me towards wisdom that helps me attack the day.
So, in terms of both of your careers, Ben, I appreciate you've retired now, but if you can cast your mind back, you've no idea how young. And Ben looks incredibly young, which is one of the. I'm going to get to the bottom of this story. Anyway, in terms of your careers, what has been the best investment of your time, energy, or money?
Okay, so mine was creating a bullshit filter. So when my daughter, I had a daughter when I was 14.
14?
Yeah, and my daughter grew up with me, she lived with me, she was raised by me. And when my daughter was 14, little did I know what I was creating, but what I was creating has come to be known as a bullshit filter. And a bullshit filter is effectively a pyramid with a goal at the top, and my goal at the top was financial freedom by the age of 35, aka retirement. And I was able to add objectives to that goal down the side of the pyramid and task that goal out. And those tasks went into my diary. And every day I did something small towards that goal. And the objectives would change and mold. And sometimes I would think, oh my God, that's a good idea. And that's going to help me achieve this goal quicker. And I would move along that path. Maybe building a new business or owning a nail salon or all sorts of random adventures along the way that helped me achieve that goal. But by creating that bullshit filter, I was able to filter the bullshit. So information would come in and I was able to say, does this help me achieve my goal, yes or no?
And this is the big top of the pyramid
goal. The big top of the pyramid goal. Yes or no? If it's no, I'm not going to spend any effort on it. I'm going to focus on it. In fact, I'm going to ignore it. If it's yes, how does it help me? And what do I need to do to achieve it? That was the best use of my time when it comes to business ever. Because...
Can you give me some examples of that?
Okay, so, for example, at one point, a couple of years ago, independently of each other, but at the same time, I owned 5 separate businesses. And they were completely unrelated. So I had nail salons. I had a consultancy that helped people with mental health. I had 50 consultants that would go out and work with people who suffered from mental health difficulties to help them maintain employment and return to work. I had software businesses. I had random kite surf businesses. I had all different businesses that were not related to one another in any way whatsoever. And the only way I was able to manage that effectively was through my diary, but most importantly through my bullshit filter. I was able to see how each one of those businesses related to the end goal. So it didn't matter that they were not connected. That made no difference at all. Because the connection was the end goal. So for me, I was like, I need to invest my time in here. So if I'm doing 16 hours a day, 17 hours a day, I have a digital distribution business, which the main business is Canada and Australia. So you can imagine my English day would finish and my Canadian day would start. And then my Australian. But for me, it wasn't hard work. It was fun because it was helping me achieve something. It was helping me achieve the way out, what I felt was the way out. So that bullshit filter was the biggest investment of my, it took time to build, it took time to focus on, it continued to use a resource, the resource of my brain to keep it going, but it was the best investment I made, the biggest investment I made.
Do you still have the bullshit filter now that you've retired?
Yeah, I'm setting a new goal.
We'll get to that. Mark.
Yeah. The biggest, the
best investment of
best
your
investment
time
or energy.
Energy or money.
I'm going to say 2 that are very closely connected in terms of time and energy. One is I put myself on a course to learn how to be a Mind Gym tutor, trainer. So Mind Gym have this sort of business where they give 45-minute, 60-minute, 90-minute workshops in corporate. They've got 3 or 4
What's a Mind Gym? For people that don't understand what that is.
So Mind Gym, Like they teach you, for example, the positive and negative change code. So dealing with change in the workplace, or how to deal with tricky people in the workplace. So just all sorts of. It's kind of like it's kind of like the psychology of business. I need to be careful because I don't want to insult my wife, who is a very senior occupational psychologist.
Who's amazing, by the way.
She's amazing, and she's a scientist.
Yeah.
I don't think that I would claim that Mind Gym is it goes close to science, although it calls on it does cite a lot of science. So there are a series of if anybody listening to this is inspired to go to Amazon and look at Mind Gym, there are some very easy to read books where there are all sorts of really easy graphs to look at and easy exercises to get involved in. But the way that they train the trainers, they really help. You need to be able to really own the room and hold the audience and get an idea across really quickly because you only got 45 minutes and learn how to work with the fastest person in the room, learn how to make it really personal, take psychology and personalize it. And I found that was a really useful training course for my job as a teacher. I'd never been a teacher before I opened the SCA. And the other thing I did is I in a previous life, I owned comedy clubs in Southern Africa. And so I learned how to do stand-up. And I've continued on a journey of learning stand-up. And I've found that's really helped me to be a better teacher. So you and I think probably met. I think we met at a conference in Poland, certainly somewhere in Eastern Europe. You'll see me on stage. I hope that I have a character on stage, or at least a confidence on stage, and I have that same character or confidence in my classroom. And I think that has been one of the tools that's helps me be a bit more confident in my vocation or my calling as a teacher. Being able to make sure that every set of ears and eyes are locked on me when I am doing an 8-hour Fidel Castro piece,
Nice callback. Okay, we're at the halfway stage.
Wow.
We are now that literally flew by. Let's get onto your shiny new object, which is hacking flow. And we discussed the flow state that I was assuming it's that beautiful state where all creativity flourishes and nothing gets in the way. And I'm obviously very keen to hear both of your views on that because that's been a kind of a big part of what you've been working on today. So can you describe what hacking flow is to an audience who have no idea what that is?
Before we talk about hacking flow, let's really nail down flow.
Did I do a terrible job? Is that what you're saying? Just shat all over what you're going to talk about. Okay.
I think that people listening will recognise flow. I would suggest that there are lots of opposites of flow. I don't suggest. Csikszentmihalyi, who is the granddaddy of flow, who wrote the book Flow and Creativity, talks about there being lots of opposites of flow: anxiety, stress, boredom, apathy. These are all examples of opposites of flow. We know that we're in flow when we're doing something for 10 hours and it felt like 10 minutes. That feeling where just time just flies by. And an opposite of flow when you do something for 10 minutes and it feels like 10 hours. Csikszentmihalyi says that we are in flow when we are pushing ourselves just beyond the current limit of our ability and getting real-time feedback. So we are in learning mode. So feedback is really important, a really important essence of flow. And we should be challenging ourselves, not to a state of anxiety and stress, but certainly away from things like boredom and apathy. So there's a sweet spot for flow, and flow is where accelerated learning takes place, and thus that's why as an educator, I'm fascinated by it as a concept. So that's flow. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And as accelerated learning takes place in flow, I want to make sure that my learners are locked in flow for as much of the time as possible. I forget now whether it was in flow or creativity, probably in both. Csikszentmihalyi talks about the 10-year law that Gladwell, when he wrote Outliers, calls the 10,000-hour law. Gladwell takes the best ideas in psychology and then turns them into great papers for the New Yorker and then makes the best of those, turns them into great books. So I think most of your listeners will be familiar with the 10,000-hour law, that when you get 10,000 hours of doing something, you become a genius at it. That's the received wisdom. the truth is it's no good doing something for 10,000 hours. You're not going to become a genius at something just doing 10,000 hours. You're going to become perhaps a genius doing something for 10,000 hours in flow, where you are constantly pushing yourself beyond your current capability, but not too far beyond, and getting internal feedback so that you are on some sort of development path. So we can see now why flow is such a great place to be, and such a great place to be in a learning environment like a classroom. And now we can then think about our own experiences in education. Certainly mine, when I was a very poor learner, where most of my time as a learner was in boredom and apathy, and very occasionally I was in anxiety, and very, very rarely was I in flow. So it seems to me that a responsibility of an education designer and an education provider ought to be to get people to be in flow much or most of the time. There are times where you want to get them to experience life's full spectrum of behaviours, but certainly we want them to be in flow most of the time. There's a toy that I bought a couple of years ago for practicing mindfulness called a Muse, M-U-S-E, and it's a little wearable device. It's a headband that you put on, and an app that you download to your iPhone or Android, and it's got EEG receivers embedded within the wearable, and so it measures brainwave. So they've gamified meditation, and so in its first iteration of Muse, it's developed a lot over the last couple of years. But in the first iteration, it played you the sounds of waves on a beach, and the quieter your mind became, the calmer the waves became. And as you started thinking about dinner or bills or whatever, the waves would come crashing in a storm, a thunderstorm would come in. But if you got calm again, the water slowed down again, and then gradually birds would land. And the game was, how many birds could you get to land on the beach? And so it's simply doing this by measuring, using EEG, by measuring brainwave activity. You get me? So that is a way, if you like, of hacking consciousness. It's a very basic example of a consumer device. You can buy a Muse on Amazon for about £200, probably £150.
So is that hacking consciousness or meditation or flow? Do you see a deep meditative state as a flow state?
No, I don't. I see that as consciousness. I see controlling your state of mind. Mindfulness is controlling state of mind, and that leads to consciousness. Flow sits inside that, and so at the moment I'm introducing tools that can measure mind activity. Flow happens when two particular brain waves, two particular frequencies are recorded in that by that EEG. Gamma and theta, I think. I wrote them down to make sure. Alpha and theta. When those two particular waves that have their very own frequency are recorded, we can come to an understanding that we are more than likely to be in a state of flow. There are other tools that we can use. So we can measure pupil dilation. We can measure skin temperature. To some extent, we can measure heartbeat. But the best science and the best open source technologies in this area, there are a couple of websites that I can cite if people want to go and see a little bit more.
Do.
Yeah, the two that I want to recommend are the Flow Genome Project. So just Google the Flow Genome Project and cohack.life. And I guess they're both really communities that are about building tools for the evolution of individual and collective flourishing is how they badge themselves.
So let me see if I've got this right. So hacking flow, that's a very interesting idea with technology. So are you saying that what you want to do is give people devices
Correct.
that tell them when they're in a flow state or when they're not?
Correct. The ambition is that at some stage over the next few years, certainly not much more than the next few years, my classroom and then other classrooms, learners will be using wearables so that I, as a facilitator, as the circus ringmaster, can spot when a learner is in flow or spot when they're in an anxiety state, and thus adjust the delivery experience to nudge people back into the right state of mind that's going to be most useful for the output that I'm looking for, that they're looking for.
So you will get access to that data on a dashboard,
Yeah.
but they don't?
They could if they wanted to, if we wanted to. There are various ways. Going back to me doing that yoga using apps, I choose not to look at that data in real time because it's going to distract me from the exercise of yoga. I look at the data perhaps on a weekly or a fortnightly basis so I can look at my trends. But if someone's practicing creativity and they are in flow doing creativity, looking at data is probably going to take them out of flow. They may get anxious that they are underperforming or overperforming or whatever. So perhaps that data belongs better on the dashboard of a facilitator who can think about things like, is the music right, or the lighting right, or should we put you in a different teaming, or set you slightly different? Think about all sorts of external influences that can try and keep you into a purposeful state. And that's my job. I'm circus ringmaster. That's my gig.
So if you were listening to this podcast and you're a creative, whatever level, and you're thinking, man, that sounds great, the idea of getting to flow as soon as possible, that is like, the holy grail. What tools or techniques could a advertising creative use to get into flow quicker than it currently takes them?
I think, so there's a couple of things. Firstly, I love tech, so I agree with everything Mike's saying. It's a great ambition. There is a caveat for me, having understood mindfulness and meditation, flow, before the tech existed to encourage it. And that is that through effort and discipline, dedication and discipline, consistency and discipline, you can achieve that state with no technology.
Sure.
Anything that tech makes easier, I love. So, if tech gets me there quicker, I'm always going to encourage it. But at the same time, the things we learn and the stories we learn through the consistency and the effort and the discipline will often be far more important than achieving the state of flow.
Okay. So I hear some of that. I'll challenge a little bit of that. But to answer Tom's question, what could a listener do that would get them into a state of flow? I think that if you want to be in flow, you need to want to be. Does that make sense?
No.
And if you were going to push yourself just beyond the limit of your ability consistently for hours, hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, you must really want to be that thing.
Yeah, that's true.
And thus
Right.
you must. There's a word that I haven't used yet in this podcast. It's wrong of me that I haven't, because it's the word that it's my reason for existing. I feel is telos. There's a Greek word called telos, and telos, simply the best definition of telos in English is purpose. The telos of a knife is to cut. Our job in life is to find our telos.
Yes, definitely. 100%.
So if you haven't yet found your telos, you've still got some work to do to find out your reason for being.
What's your telos?
To discover talent and grow talent.
To expand, to figure out where my limit is. That's definitely, I would love to know where my limit is.
What do you mean by limit?
I would love to be defeated. I would enjoy that.
But you have to go into detail. What do you mean? Physically, philosophically?
Definitely, both.
Beard-wise?
Yeah, no.
It's already happened today, so to break it to you.
Just in general, when I lived in China with the Buddhist monks. And when I first got there, they broke me. Physically and mentally, they broke me. Much as you would imagine the Marine Corps would break a recruit. They break you. And then I realised that I wasn't broken. I was in a state of learning. And I realised that what I thought was impossible was no longer impossible. And since then, I'm not sure I've been defeated. And I would like to know that I failed at things. I've had unsuccessful businesses, that have failed,
from which you probably learned from.
which I learned massively.
But is
from,
that your
but
purpose?
not defeated. I think I just want to know. I have a thirst for knowledge, and I think maybe
I think I would find your purpose as to provoke.
Yeah, maybe provoke, disrupt. Maybe,
Yeah,
like,
I think I've known you 10, 15 years or so. I would suggest that you are a provocateur, and particularly a provocateur of people's way of understanding the way that they've been shaped in the world, just challenging their very shape.
So to tie it back to the question, so in order for that marketing gone from Buddhist monks to marketing professionals again.
I know, right?
It's very swiftly. So that person wants to get in state quicker. So if they understand their telos, which probably isn't selling baked beans or Bovril.
Yeah.
So how does the advertising professional find their telos and use that to access flow? Explain that for me.
There's a very small resource of the brain that does what Mark's talking about. It's very small. So the part of the brain that does what Mark's talking about is like 4% of the brain. It's very easily overwhelmed.
Which part of the brain is it?
It's the prefrontal cortex. It's the front of the brain. It does the processing, the understanding, the thinking, the learning. All of that information is done through the front part of the brain. And it's tiny. It's 4% of the brain. And it's really easily overwhelmed. It's overwhelmed by thinking about shit that I've already done, thinking about stuff that I need to do, thinking about everything that's going on. And that leaves me with a tiny percentage, which is not enough to go into flow. That percentage of that, about 1% of the 4%, so that 10% of the 90 of the 100% that I could potentially have to create is not enough. It's not enough. So what I have to understand is what is occupying that part of the brain. And anyone can do that. Anyone can sit and be a philosopher for half an hour and figure out what the hell is occupying that part of the brain. What's making me feel anxious? What am I thinking about all the time? What's my repetitive thoughts? And challenge it. Put a process in place to manage it. You'll never defeat it. It will never go away. It's always going to be there. But you're going to get efficient at managing it. And through efficiency of managing, which is about process, I'm then able to put myself in a state of flow. But that is not a simple. That's not a simple task. That's not like a.
But is there a technology to do that?
Yes, there's a technology which will assist you.
Yeah, there is machine-based learning tools that can help you with that sort of stuff. I kind of want to go sideways from some of the stuff that Ben is talking about, and just explore different ways of finding out what your telos is and how to get into flow. So there's an idiom in advertising that good is the enemy of great. You've heard that probably loads of times. Good is the enemy of great. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
And there'll be a lot of people listening to this podcast that are in fairly good jobs. You know, they're working for a fairly good organisation, and they've got a fairly good salary, and they've got a fairly good desk and a fairly good iPhone, and therefore they are prisoners because it's very difficult to leave something that's fairly good. If you are somewhere that's fairly good. And fairly happy, you probably need to do something quite urgently about it because you are going to end up being a fairly good egg. And I would hate on my gravestone someone to write, yeah, he was a fairly good egg. I want people to write that I was a CUMT or I was a god. I don't want to be somewhere in the middle. I want it's got to be
those are the two extremes.
It's got to be. It's got to be. There's no point, right? You only get one go at this. You might as well make the best go possible. I had a spectacular breakdown in 2008, where disaster calamity happened, and I had great support systems around me.
What was your spectacular breakdown?
I wanted to sell my business to Motorola Ventures. Motorola wanted to buy my business, and I'd lost controls of that particular business, and I was not allowed to sell it.
What was the business?
That was mobile technology, connecting mobile devices, databases, point-of-sale systems. And so I realised I had no control in my life. And I also realised I'd become a flash money-driven type of guy. I had silly fast cars and flash houses, and I couldn't drive. I don't know how to drive very well, and I was living the wrong life. I was not living to my telos. What I had learned was in all the various businesses that I had owned, what I was very good at was taking kids out of school or taking kids out of uni, giving them their first job, giving them great learning experiences, and they've gone on since working for me to have great businesses, great careers after they left me. So I realised in reflection in my breakdown that my purpose is to find that talent and to develop and nurture that talent. So what I found for me was that I had the good luck of having a good, spectacular breakdown. When you break yourself down, you can have, if you get through recovery, you have the opportunity to put yourself back together in the correct order. I'm not for a moment suggesting that everybody ought to go and have a breakdown, but if you are going to have a breakdown, make the best use of that breakdown.
You know, it's interesting. I'm starting to come to the opinion that everyone should have a spectacular breakdown because it takes an outside negative force to get you out of a fairly good situation.
That's the point, just get out of that good situation.
When someone says, "Oh, I've been made redundant," I'm like, well, brilliant. You're probably at my age-ish, so therefore you've probably got some kind of payoff or some money in the bank.
Exactly.
And that is now the catalyst to get you to do that thing. Like if I got out of my job because I had to take a sabbatical. So I was like, right, I'm going to take this time, and like whatever happens. I didn't lose my job, but I kind of created a fake redundancy in a way. And I was like, well, I've got to get out of Dodge in 3 months to make it work, and it's going okay, which is cool. But I think that if you are comfortable, you do have a decent iPhone, you do have a decent car, you do have a decent house, you are
it's
stuck.
hard. You're a prisoner,
really hard.
And you get kicked out of that, then that's a lottery win.
But that comes back to that attachment thing, right? And the truth part. You've become attached to that is good enough, and the concept and the preconceived what is good enough.
It's true. So we've short on time, and I know, Mark, you're halfway through this, getting to people to understand what they tell us. So spectacular breakdown.
So, yeah. From that, an opportunity is to find out what your purpose is. So, for example, your purpose is you've set up this consultancy. You want to share wisdom with the world through the podcast series that we're now on, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other stuff. And I'm sure within that you can recognise that you are in a different physiological state than perhaps you were back in corporate life. That you are a happier person, that days run past faster, that you are more interested and more interesting, and so easy to get into flow because you are living the true Tom that you were meant to be. Perhaps you're not there. I mean, you'll know. But it's important that you find that you are honest to yourself and that you, again, like I say, you only get one go at this.
So I'm going to force us back to this question. So the advertising creative who wants to get in flow quicker, he wants to hack flow, what are the steps that he or she should take?
Well, it depends what they're doing.
So a typical state, in my limited experience of working in not that many agencies, is you need to come up with an idea fast.
Okay.
Right. You said the pitch comes in, and the pitch is in 3 weeks' time. Someone's got to do some research. Some dude's got to write a strategy. And then the creatives have got, we've got 4 days, and then we're pitching for Bovril next Tuesday.
So how are we going to get there? I guess is your question. How are we going to make sure that creative can smash out an idea faster and faster because the demands of opcos are that no longer do we have 6 months to come up with a campaign, we've now got 6 days. How are we going to do it? My answer to that is fundamentally muscle memory. So the creative process is a process, and almost all processes are improved through muscle memory. So as we can learn the processes, as we practice the processes and become confident with them, we will start to learn which particular creative techniques we are more connected to, and we are all different. So we have different techniques that will work better for us and perhaps our creative partner or partners. Different times of day, different environments, physical environments, audible environments, and so forth. That muscle memory is about building an awareness of the how one needs to be in order to have those ideas.
So you talk about time of day and environment and audio.
Can be, for example, or temperature it could be, or whether you've eaten or not it could be.
So from a data perspective, those are inputs, right? Time of day, environment, audio, diet. How do you, as a creative, track that? So I'm a creative. I'm thinking, right, I did a pitch last week. And we won that pitch.
I'm a huge believer in spreadsheets. I teach my students to use spreadsheets a lot.
Tell me about that.
So, as an example, because ideas are very subjective, right? Whether an idea works or not can later move away from subjectivity. We can use raw data to understand the efficiency of the communication. But before that communication's been executed and invested in, it is totally subjective. It's down to the client or the ECD or the CCO as to whether that idea is interesting or not. So it's subjective. Quantity is not subjective. We can quantify the number of ideas that we have, and one could argue that quantity leads to quality. But even that is still subjective because one needs to evaluate the quality of the ideas. So I encourage my students to use a spreadsheet with a traffic light system: red, amber, green. When we show that idea to a creative partner or partners or mentors or clients, look at their eyes and listen to their feedback. And if their feedback is overwhelmingly positive, it's green. And if it's, this is a pile of shit, this is boring or whatever, it's red. And if it's ambivalent, if it's neutral, it's amber. And if you show that idea to 40, 50 people, you will I've got 36 students and every day there's half a dozen mentors in the studio, 900 will visit through the year. You'll very quickly start to see patterns in your ideas. So you can start to see patterns as to when you had those ideas and where you had those ideas and what colour those traffic lights are becoming. Does that make sense? So that what ideally we're looking for are ideas that are divisive, where there's a lot of green and a bit of red. They're the best ideas, ideas that massively offend 20% of the people, and 80% it gives them the biggest hard-on of their lives. That's what we're looking for. If we have ideas where sort of 50% is amber, they're neutral, and the rest is whatever, that's kind of dull. That's kind of the work of a middle-of-the-road agency, as sort of a jaded creative somewhere. That do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that traffic light system is a really simple way of the creative using feedback loops to very quickly learn how to evaluate the productivity and diarise perhaps the where and the when and the how they came to that idea. So, of course, there are other things that will influence the quality of the brief.
That is a brilliant idea. So I've got my spreadsheet to hand.
Yes.
And I do 10 ideas to you guys, and I've got 3 greens, 5 whatever, and 2 reds. Does you encourage your students to write in the scenario around that feedback right then, or is that a kind of reflective thing you do in the evening?
I think everyone's different. I encourage them more to listen to the feedback and to write notes down somewhere on a moleskin or on their phone, and then go to their Excel spreadsheet or their Google Docs spreadsheet later and annotate. Explain who it is that they showed it to. I showed it to this agency at Wydens, and they, 5 people from Wydens, and these were the kind of feedback from people at Wydens, and I showed it to 3 people from, J. Walter. Because different agencies and people within agencies are going to often follow their leader. There is a sound that emanates out of Wydens that's very different to the sound that emanates out of Ogilvy or J. Walter or, Jack Morton, very different agencies that are in very different places. That's not to say that one is better than the other. They're better for different people or different brands. There are cultural homes that different brands and different people belong to. And again, that feedback, learning using traffic light systems, is a useful way of helping a student creative, or any creative for that matter, work out where they belong, where their home would be.
That is such a great idea. I'm gonna try that. That's brilliant. Cool. I think that also has you could easily transport that across into sales. Like all the meetings. What did you get? A green, and orange, red. Which I think its own form of creativity. Like, okay, do I get most of my reds in the morning or the afternoon? Anyway, I'm going to stop riffing because that's it. The hour's up.
Wow.
All right.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that I took a massive punt on you, Ben, because you were the perfect guest. Thank you.
No worries, man.
How would you like people or not to get in touch with you after this podcast?
People can get in touch with me with pleasure. I love meeting people, but only at school. So come down. We're always looking for sponsors to come and set live briefs. So if you are from a brand and you want to help fund a scholarship, set a brief, fund a scholarship, that's a great thing. If you are interested in just seeing what the school's about, we have an open door policy. Just come in and see what's happening in the school. Just get in touch. At SCA2Dean is my Twitter. I don't know what my Instagram is. At SCA 2 Dean, my job.
Thank you. Ben, you just want to be left the hell alone?
No, it's cool. Like email if people want to chat. I'm still doing the talks, like occasionally when people.
You're going to have to share your email.
So it's ben.a.andrews@gmail.com.
Brilliant. Guys, that is an hour. That was a total pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you so much.